here's an example here, and I'm getting into the concept of maturity or duration. So let's say somebody lends to somebody else due on December, that's lent due in November. So this is lent 4 times. Is this fraud? Is there anybody that would argue that what's happening here is fraud? We have fractional reserve gold and 4 claims to the same gold coin. We do have 4 claims to the same gold coin at different times.
So lending is basically giving a promise, whereas if you were paid an ounce of gold for something that you were getting, it's not lending.
That's also
I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but I'm
right.
trying to keep up with you.
So you can have both spend it and lend it.
No, right. If you lend it, then you can't spend it. That's correct. And so I thought this was a great quote from J.P. Morgan. Gold is money and everything else is credit. This is such a critical distinction. Mises doesn't really make this distinction to his detriment. And so one of the concepts of Professor Fekete is duration mismatch. Whether the bank is lending out its demand deposits, which of course is occurring today, or whether the bank is lending out 2-year deposits for 5-year loans or 30-year mortgages, is really immaterial. Either way, the problem is borrowing short to lend long. So I also have that quote, "It's not a problem until it's a problem." But every time I hear that expression sets my teeth on edge. This is the real problem. And by the way, if any of you have been in discussions with Keynesians or monetarists talking about the 19th century gold standard, they say, yes, but there was a business cycle even in the 19th century under gold. And so your theory that the central bank is what causes the business cycle or the credit cycle is wrong. The answer is, yes, that's true. There was a credit cycle in those days. And the cause of it was duration mismatch, borrowing short to lend long. Because eventually, sooner or later, if your liabilities and assets are mismatched, so you're borrowing money from your depositors, which is essentially on demand, and you're lending out for people to buy homes for 30 years, sooner or later, the depositors may need their money for something or other. And you've presumed that they won't, or that there will always be another depositor to come along. Sooner or later, the bid on the mortgage goes away. So you have to suddenly sell assets on the bid in order to make good on your depositors. Suddenly the bid goes away on the mortgages, and now the bank is suddenly left upside down and closed. So somebody's going to take dreadful losses on that. So that's what happened even in the 19th century, and in fact even in the 18th and 17th centuries in Europe and England, was duration mismatch. So I talked about what happens in the bond market with no bid. The reason why they do this, of course, this is very tempting. You can borrow money in the overnight market, very low interest on that. And if you can lend it out for 30 years, you can make a huge spread if you're a bank doing this. Banks are in the business of making a spread. That's how they make their money. But this is an illicit arbitrage. This is essentially fraud. I'm open to the idea whether or not this needs to be legal, but certainly everybody that understands economics or money should be opposed to giving their money to a bank that would do this. All right, so my definition of inflation has nothing to do with consumer prices. It has to do with expanding credit, particularly counterfeit credit. So this idea of can you spend it and lend it at the same time, it's essentially counterfeiting credit. And that's, of course, what our system is based on today. That's how I define inflation. The depositor, the saver, puts money in the bank and says, I may need this back at any instant. This is on demand. And the bank lends it out for 30 years. It's fraud. That's counterfeit. That is an expansion of credit that is illicit and wrong and sends all the wrong price signals to the market. Versus if I say, please lend this out for 30 years, and of course, please pay me an appropriate interest rate for a 30-year duration, that's not inflation at all, something else.
So would you say crediting for 30 years and lending for lesser amount would be the proper way to do this?
Yeah, you can always, if the saver gives you a 30-year deposit, you can always lend it out for 1 year. That's legitimate. Now, you're not going to, because the interest rate spread would be negative. You're paying too much for the 30-year deposit, so there's no reason why anybody would ever do that. But yes, that would be perfectly fine.
Unless it's inverted curve.
Well, but anyway, we're talking pathology here. Notice the bottom thing here. If we're defining inflation that way, and we realize that every inflation deflates, this is again the cause of the panics and depressions of the 19th century. All of a sudden, this expansion of counterfeit credit comes due, becomes called by the depositors or by the counterparties of the screen here. The red line is the price of gold in the spot market, and the black line is the price of gold in the futures market. The point I want to make on this, and yeah, well, this is a few months old now, it's 1742, $100 off from where the price was on Friday. The point I want to make to you here is that it should be pretty obvious that there's almost 100% correlation between these two prices. If two things that are separate markets for separate goods have a perfect correlation, there must be some mechanism or some force that causes them to remain the same, and not an abstract aggregate, well, they ought to be the same somehow. There's no somehow. In fact, the mechanism is arbitrage.
Keith, what are those lines?
The price of gold in the spot market and the price of gold in the futures market.
Okay.
What was the point you wanted to make there? Sorry.
What was what?
What was the point you wanted to make?
If two prices of two different things are locked, there's a real market force that's causing them to be locked. And every time one price moves but not the other, there must be a force that continually reasserts itself to keep it together. And so, so the force is called arbitrage in the Austrian school. And the point is that traders, and in fact all entrepreneurs, are not really motivated by price, but they're motivated by a spread. Right? So if I'm an entrepreneur and I think that I want to get into the business of selling light rail systems to government, and I find out that the average light rail system is $1 billion, that doesn't tell me whether this is going to be a good business or not. The question I have to ask is, what will it cost me to produce it? If it will cost me $900 million to sell for $1 billion, that might be a pretty good business. That sounds like about 11% spread on that. Maybe that's a pretty good business. If it will cost me $1.2 billion to produce it, then it's not a good business. So what everybody does is they straddle the spread. They buy something, which is the long leg, and they sell something, which is the short leg. And it could be shipping wheat from Cleveland to Chicago. It could be producing light rail systems, whatever it is. And the reason why I use the C-clamp analogy here, imagine that this is the long leg. You're buying something, and in so doing, you're lifting the offer. And over here, you're selling something, hopefully at a higher price, so you're pressing the bid. This clamp over here has infinite force. Right? With just your two fingers, you can crush anything that is put between those jaws. And in fact, just to go back a couple of slides, you can crush the difference in the price between December gold and spot gold. Like that. So I'm getting a little bit technical here, but I'm culminating in a really important point. The futures market should normally have a price that is higher than the spot market, and each successive farther out future should be a higher price than the nearer all the way back to spot, which should be the lowest. So the bid is rising. The spread, of course, is widening because 3 years out there's a lot less liquidity. But this should be rising. Why? Because it costs money to carry a good.
Well, sure.
And interest on the capital. Backwardation is not a normal state. This is when the futures are cheaper than the present. And the only reason that this should normally happen, and I know I've got a commodities trader in the back, so I'm really careful and tiptoe around the tulips on this, is if there's a physical shortage. So right before the corn harvest comes in, you'd expect corn to be in backwardation. If you want to buy corn for October delivery, wonderful, I got tons of corn. You want to buy it on the barrelhead right now, right here today? No, it's a little bit more scarce. And so there are two arbitrages based on whether you have contango or backwardation. This is a little bit technical, but the point is, in order to carry the good, which means to buy it and simultaneously sell a future against it, that's what compresses that spread. All you really need is cash, or in today's world, credit. And since the big banks essentially have unlimited credit at essentially zero, there's never any limit to this carry trade if there's a positive basis. If the co-basis is positive, which is backwardation, you need the physical goods. And so that's why I emphasize corn or wheat can go into a backwardation from which the market cannot recover until the new harvest. Unlike gold, we just said earlier that gold has something like 80 years, according to the official estimates, and probably much higher in reality, 80 years worth of mine production and inventory. Gold isn't scarce. It's the most plentiful commodity known to man, if you define it correctly. happens when gold goes into backwardation? What does it mean? It's not a shortage, right? So by the way, gold was in backwardation in December of 2008. It's had, and that was a fairly big backwardation, in the order of around 2.5% from the spot price in mid-December 2008 to the February future.